Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the show about building a healthier relationship with modern technology. Now, here are your hosts, R. Blank and Stephanie Warner.
Our guest today, Dr. Morgan Oakes, has quite an incredible story. With his career path traversing from stand-up comedy, firefighter, chiropractor, keynote speaker, and mechanical engineer, he found his true calling helping others in the conscious cultivation of body, mind, and spirit. Morgan blends ancient wisdom with the tools of modern transformation to help others heal and evolve. Dr. Morgan Oakes, welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction, R. Great to be here.
Welcome.
So if you could, I just gave everybody the kind of dime story of your background, but it obviously you had a lot of interesting parts just in that short intro. Could you share with our listeners some of the early stages of your career that led you to become a high performance coach and shamanic healer?
Absolutely. So it's interesting. My background, I grew up in a small town in Wyoming, very blue collar. I was in like dirt bikes and trucks, and I was good at math and science. So that, all my teachers were like, oh, that'd be a great a way to get into engineering. So I went to school for mechanical engineering and had a history of sports injuries. And so that I was working with a chiropractor doing that. And in engineering, I finally realized I didn't want to be stuck behind a computer all day, that I wanted to move over into chiropractic and have that be my path. And to be honest, that has opened up everything else that's happened. When I got into that, some people are doing just chiropractic, but for me, there was always like this fringe edge of how else could I help people, right? So I got into physical therapy and doing that when I was in chiropractic school. At a certain point, I added neurolinguistic programming to address the unconscious mind. I was always adding the next piece, and then eventually had a spiritual awakening in 2005. And that opened up energy work and shamanic work and studying quantum physics to explain all of it. And I'm always going, okay, like, what's the next thing that I'm really into? And then if it's not something I'm into, how do I get really good at referring out to that person so that whoever I'm working with, their success is my ultimate destination, not so much keeping them in my whatever business paradigm they're working with me.
So you have obviously a pretty broad spectrum of interests, and from the sound of it, you don't suffer from a lack of motivation. How do you get others to believe in themselves as much as you believe in them as a coach?
I think there's a piece of like finding the gap, right? Even thinking about coming onto this show, you've had so many amazing interviewees, and I'm like, I can't go that deep into EMF. I can't, like, some of the like ridiculous depth of science that the people have gone on to on this show. I'm like, I can't do that. But what I can do is I can fill in the gaps, right? And I think that's been a big thing in coaching. A spiritual teacher once told me 80% of everything is always working, right? So we all have these pillars and foundations in our life that we can really lean into and strengthen. And then we always have a growth edge of places that could be better, or things that aren't working so well that we could kind of try to remove or do less of. So it's really just leaning into what are the strengths we already have, and then what's the best tool that's going to get the person to where they're wanting to go most efficiently and painlessly.
Wellness has always been, it sounds like, right, because you started out, you were doing athletics, and you got into medicine. Wellness has always been a part of the work, or at least in your interest. Why do you think that is? I mean, for you in particular.
Yeah, initially it probably looked like wellness, but I just was doing what made sense, right? Like, I got good grades just because I'm like, well, I should just try as hard as I can, and even like growing up, I did every single sport in my hometown because what else am I going to do? And then at a certain point, I'm like, oh, if I get to beat somebody up in the sport, I actually do better at it. So then I was leaning more towards like football, rugby, things that were a little more aggressive. And I was really just doing what was fun and interesting for me. It was never really about the health benefits of it. And it wasn't until much later, like even getting into chiropractic, it was based on sports injuries. So even for that, it wasn't wellness. It ended up being an injury or a series of injuries kind of pushing me in that direction. And it wasn't until I got into chiropractic that I really started learning more about prevention and health maintenance. Um, and then it was, years later, I was actually in a shamanic ceremony laying there. And I remember just kind of crying and thinking, like, how can I do more to impact the healing of the world? And so I really got into chiropractic without even truly caring about being a healer, right? It was very like, oh, I want to help people with sports injuries and one-on-one. And it's just taken honestly decades for it to evolve into something bigger than just, this one-on-one, what's your problem?
Oh,
No, I just thought that was an interesting to go from the perspective of, it sounds like anyways, you got into chiropractic and healing, quote unquote, based on, with the motivation of helping people continue to do the thing that actually probably causes the injuries. And that kind of brought you into this aspect of awareness and desire to help people actually heal, because you then became the person who was the healer and then had this awakening. I just think that path is really, really interesting.
Yeah, nobody's mirrored it back that way, but that's exactly true. And what's interesting, in my office, I'm always trying to educate and empower. So let's say women in high heel shoes. Right, they're
Yes.
horrible for the human body, but a lot of times I'm trying to get women healthier so they can wear high heel shoes. And it's always with the caveat, like, I want to get you healthy enough you can do this, but I also want to educate you enough to where you realize that it's not great for your body. And I think that's true with tech as well. Like, a lot of stuff that I teach in the office is because cell phones, laptops, there's a lot of like postural stuff that we have to address chiropractically. There's a
Yeah.
lot of how's our mind mentally, emotionally working. And I'll deal with that more as like a certified high performance coach. How are our electronics and our notifications negatively impacting our productivity, our focus, our mindfulness, our stress levels. And so, yeah, it really changed into me being a healer. And even chiropractically, at a certain point, I realized, wow, if I can get this person's spine feeling better, but the rest of their life is a mess, have I really done them a favor? Right. And that's how a lot, it went from just, let's say, body to body, mind, spirit focus, because they're all tied together.
And in your chiropractic practice, do you find that people are, or your clientele is open to kind of a broader discussion and a broader view of their health holistically?
Sometimes, right? It's there are, at this point, like, it's not a script in my office, certainly not. And if you've had a conversation enough times, you kind of know the high points and you're able to weave away from that. And so I will tend to put things out there in a way that I get a sense, like, is this something you're interested in? I'll share things with people and they're like, yeah, I'm not willing to do that. Awesome. Well, that's okay. And so I kind of meet people where they're at, and depending on
Right.
what they're open to, how motivated they are, and sometimes it's away from pain, like an injury, or somebody who can't play with their grandkids because their low back keeps going out, or they miss a week of work every year based on some type of issue. That's usually how people find me. And then from there, it's like, cool, can we accelerate into excellence? Right, fine tuning. And when that happens, and when people are open to even the smallest of things, it creates massive transformation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's really interesting. And yeah, I imagine that, even if the person isn't necessarily like, no, I'm not going to do that thing, you're planting a seed, which is
Planting a seed, yeah. And well, and when I first came out of school, I'm like, all right, like, I love these people so much, I'm going to give them so much, like, here's your 45 minutes of exercise to do every day. And I was just so naive, and nobody does that, nobody will do that.
it's true.
Right. And so now, like, There's a simple, and I'm willing to share these on the show because I think there's just so much benefit to it. Like, I teach a 3-minute exercise just to help strengthen the neck for people, right? Because the longer we are in that forward head
Yes.
posture, looking at our tablets or our cell phones, at our technology, those muscles get weak and then we develop issues. I might teach them, gosh, one of the most difficult personal growth things I've ever given to somebody is just simply stare into a mirror and look into your own eyes for like 60 seconds and just say, I love you out loud. Right. I've had people, it's taken them months to be able to do a 60-second exercise,
Wow. Wow. I'm
and the
gonna do
neck.
that actually. That sounds like a really
Yeah,
great
and also
exercise.
I think I'd like to take you up on that offer for the three
For
minute
sure.
Yeah,
neck exercise.
let's do that. So I
Yeah.
know this is coming out as a podcast, so hopefully I'll explain it so people can picture it. So imagine being at home, laying flat on the floor. It's better to do it on the floor than in bed because beds tend to be too soft. So you're at home, laying flat on the floor. Your face is nice and parallel to the floor, right? So you're basically looking straight up to the ceiling. You're not looking at the wall above you. You're not looking at your feet. And with that, people can just lift their head literally enough off the ground that you could fit like a pinky underneath there, right? That is the simple exercise. Some people can't even hold their head in that position for 5 seconds, right? So I will
Wow.
start people just by having them lift and hold and just start working up time. A lot of people will start at 5 seconds and doing that 6 times. And I'm always really careful of, like, if this causes any pain, don't push it. You shouldn't be in pain when you do it. You shouldn't have pain after you do it. For everybody listening, this could and should be coordinated with a healthcare provider, probably a chiropractor, somebody that deals specifically with the neck and the musculoskeletal system. But just by simply doing that, most people in my office start at 5 seconds. And the goal is always to get them to 30 seconds, right? If you can slowly start adding that time, the neck will get stronger. And if you can imagine, everybody out there listening to this podcast, imagine that like hunched over little old man or woman, that their head is way out in front of their body. That's unfortunately the way that ergonomics and posture, that's the de-evolution of humanity right now. So as you keep strengthening that neck, you're going to have the ability to hold your head back above your shoulders, and it's going to protect against headaches, neck pain. It's going to help support good posture. And that's probably the biggest thing, at least physical body wise, overlapping into technology that I deal with every single day in that office.
No, that's great. I really appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah. Thank you.
And we on our blog and in other interviews we talk about, I guess it's called text neck is the condition, and it seems to be happening to almost everybody these days. And someone else we were interviewing was putting it in terms of about how much time we spend with our necks craned over to devices compared to before phones, even after the tech revolution, but before phones, how little time we spent in that pose versus now, 10, 15 years later, how much time in a day we're spending just looking like that. And it's happening obviously in children very, very young. So they're getting into those behaviors very early.
Yeah. Well, and with that, before it would have been eating, reading, writing, right? Those would have been the 3 times that, let's say, pre 1995 or whatever, that everybody was doing in that posture. But now we add in tech, and a lot of times I tell people, like, if you're at home, if you can throw a couple pillows on your lap so your elbows are propped up, and if you think about what you should do on a desktop computer, right, you're looking straight ahead in good posture. How can you mimic that with a tablet or a cell phone? And that's a really good preventative thing. Like, you can just put a couple pillows on your lap, prop up your elbows, and then you're looking straight ahead, and it's not requiring effort from your arms to maintain that position. So if you can do that when you can, we can't always do that, but that's one way to kind of, get around that and just try to be preventative.
Right, because you talk a lot about the role of intuition in your process, but also in the healing process, right? So before I get to my next question, could you just talk a little bit about the role that you see intuition playing in wellness?
Yeah. Let's weave it into how it plays into all of it together. So if we look at intuition and even what comes from dreams, right? It's called dreams, involuntary form of intuition, right? So when we look at Albert Einstein's theory of relativity, that came from a dream. If we look at the chemical structure for benzene, basically the foundation of inorganic chemistry, came from a dream. Design for the sewing machine came from a dream, right? There's all these things that have shown up based on intuition or dream space. It's helped develop a lot of the tech. It's helped, even Steve Jobs. I have a quote from him that I use when I'm speaking. Steve Jobs talks about intuition, right? He's kind of a grandfather of a lot of our technology at this point. And so I think that weaves into it. When we look at it from the side of health, there's a great book by, I believe it's Dr. Lisa Rankins. And it's basically, it's a book on basically surviving a diagnosis of cancer that you're supposed to die from. And what she did was, she's a holistic oncology PhD, looking at what are the 9 statistically viable things that will help people survive a cancer diagnosis you're supposed to die from. One of them was intuition, right? So a lot of times, even without knowing the science, we know if a food is marketed to us as healthy, we know it's actually not, right? And if there's something we're doing that's having a negative impact, we have that little voice in the back of our mind that's saying like, hey, like, I know you think this is good and you're making all these excuses, but we both know it's really not, right? So intuition, I think, really plays into what can help us with health as well. And so I think it weaves into everything. Just how do we use our conscious mind, our book educated mind, the research driven aspect of all of this, but also use our intuition to go, just because maybe this industry says this is healthy, I'm noticing it doesn't actually work with my body.
So, and I appreciate that discussion. And the reason I wanted to put a little spotlight on this is because when I was listening to you talk about intuition in some of your past interviews, it made me think about in these terms, right? Where because following your intuition means taking a beat, stepping back, listening. And
Mhm.
what I thought when I heard that is, are there people for whom their relationships with technology are discouraging their ability to listen to their intuition, right? Because technology is competing for attention with everything else in our lives, and the more of a relationship we have with technology, it seems to me it would be harder to kind of take that beat, to listen to what's actually going on in your head instead of what's popping up in your notifications.
Absolutely. And I wish I'd remember where I first read this, but it was somebody discussing the idea that kind of these inherent gifts to humanity, like intuition, um, there are these muscles, right? And if you don't use a muscle, you lose it. We know that on so many different levels. And yeah, I would say back in the day, right? You might have had an intuition like, wow, how's my spouse doing? Maybe I should go home, right? We hear stories like, the son who has an injury on the East Coast and the mom on the West Coast knows about it instantaneously, right? There's so much research and so much study done around that. And now we've kind of let go of our connection to nature and to the world around us. And even if we talk on quantum physics, like there's always a connection there. But I feel like if your mind is so occupied with external stimulus that, yeah, you miss a lot of those. And so I, I try to make it a real point. Like I'll recommend people going on a walk in nature, right? Nature might just be around your neighborhood, but like not listening to a podcast, not listening to radio, not in conversation with somebody, but just white space. One, we know that a 30-minute walk in nature outperformed Prozac for mental health studies. And this was like 20 or 30 years ago at this point. So there's a real benefit there, but also that's a great time for intuitions to come in, something bigger than ourselves, something that'll fill in the gaps in what's happening in business, relationship, health, all those different areas of our life.
That you do you find yourself giving your clients feedback and recommendations on their relationships with technology? Is that part of your treatment regimen with any of your clientele?
It is part of it. And with all things, moderation,
Right.
right? And so I use cell phones as much as anybody else. I use computers as much as anyone else. And how can we develop a healthy relationship? How can we create space from that? How can we monitor and realize when something's out of control? And so, yeah, it's a big part of what I share chiropractically. It's a big part of what I share as a high performance coach. And even a lot of the mitigation techniques for tech are like, let's just break even, right? We're trying to monitor EMF so it's not too high. We're trying to maybe monitor social media time so it's only scrambling our brains a little bit, not a lot, right? Like all these things are like, oh my gosh, I hope we can just break even on this, right? And a lot of my stuff is about not just surviving, but thriving, right? Like how can we how can we work for 50 minutes doing whatever we're doing and then take like a 5-minute break and raise our energy so that we're vibrant throughout the day, that we're not just surviving, but we're thriving in all these different areas.
Your treatment sounds like it spans a lot of different factors and behaviors with your clients. And so, certain things I'm sure are easier for them to adopt, and certain things maybe have more resistance. Have you noticed any sort of broader trends in terms of whether your clients find it easier or harder to make these modifications with their technology relationships?
Sometimes depends on motivation, right? Like how many people, yeah, we just couldn't get Steve to start, eating better till after he had that heart attack or that, minor stroke, right? Sometimes we need a big, not the carrot to pull us forward, but the stick needs to be bigger to kind of move us in a proper direction. And so, I think with all of this and with ourselves as well, what's that motivation that's going to pull us forward? For some people, I'm like, cool, we've got this half Ironman in 6 months, and we got to make sure you don't break in the training for that. For some people, it's like, yeah, you're telling me you miss a few days of work a month based on these headaches. Like, let's get you away from that. Or, or you're trying to have this really successful relationship, but you're always angry or depressed, right? So can we, get rid of those so that you can have the proper relationship that you say that you're wanting? And so a lot of times, I think it's just for motivation, and it's true for me as well. There'll be a part of my life that feels like it's the one I'm needing to work on. And usually I'm trying to go, okay, like what's that one thing I can pick that might level up like 4 or 5 different things? And usually for me, to be honest, it's typically nutrition or fitness. Those really weave together. And I know when I eat poorly, I feel bad. I'm not as productive. Then I beat myself up. When I get fit and when I'm eating better foods, it's like I'm vibrating up above all the gunk in life, and then it kind of floats under me, and I don't really experience it. And then that allows me to be a better partner in a relationship, be a better coach, be a better chiropractor, be more productive when I'm just doing back office stuff. So I think it's about finding the motivation that works for each individual person and then going, okay, cool. What's my entry point where I can make enough change to start experiencing momentum and growth?
Do you do you have do you find ways in which because obviously a lot of what we talk about and a lot of what you and I've just talked about is being aware of and maybe addressing some of the harms that come with our from our relationship with technology. Are there ways in which you find technology is helpful to your clients, or that you recommend that they should add more of it into their lives or into their treatment regimen?
I think tech for some people really helps people with self-awareness, right? And maybe that's how many steps did I get today? If somebody's incredibly sedentary, like having that, that gamification of those 10,000 steps, like that can be a life changer. Maybe it's productivity apps that help them remind them of something. I did this kind of fitness and personal growth challenge called 75 Hard last fall. When I got back from Central America last fall, that's kind of what I did. I'm like, okay, I need something big to get me into this next chapter of life. And every single day I had to like click my app and make sure I had done all the things, So I think there are great ways that tech can help support this. And this being living a vibrant life, whatever that
Yeah,
means.
no, when you're talking about that, I relate personally from Duolingo. The gamification of studying another language has really
Yeah.
helped prompt, because I'm doing it every day. Because the thought of being demoted a league for some reason is a big motivator to keep up my Spanish lessons.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
Uh,
find with my tech use, one of the gauges and metrics that I rely on heavily is for myself personally is how does it make me feel? So I
Mm.
love using tools. There's so many great tools. So like you said, counting steps, that thing that you do every day to create that habit. And there's a lot of tech that can help us create these good habits. And so when I'm on my phone and I'm using, these habit trackers or whatever, what I find is sometimes it's easy to then go over to Facebook, and that's where I really gauge in and I dial in, how do I feel? How does using this make me feel? And I think that for me has been a really helpful way to limit some of the to stay above that gunk of the world and life is like, if it makes me feel yucky, don't engage.
Yeah, and that, I mean, the ability just to listen to your physical body, mental, emotional,
Yeah.
energetic, physical. I mean, that's the baseline. There's so much research that, like, if we're in a game that's wired to cheat us, let's say a poker type game, and they've done studies on this, your palms will start sweating before your mind mentally knows you're being cheated. Right. So if
Oh, interesting.
if we can listen to the body wisdom, that's such a great way to do it. And then in tech, like, let's say a notification pops up on your phone and you just glance over, you just lost like 20 minutes of productivity. We know you don't get back into flow for 20 minutes. Right. So same thing. We know artificial intelligence has really wired it to make us so addicted to some of those things. So, make it one or two steps harder to pull up Facebook so that you have time to go, oh yeah, this is not what I'm wanting to do.
Sorry, you go, Steph.
I was gonna say, I love that you say that because this is a tip. I've said this in a few of our interviews, and I love to reiterate this because it's so helpful for me to stay off of social media when I don't want to be on it. Is I moved Facebook from swipe 1 to swipe 5. And if you
Ooh,
have to
yeah.
swipe 5 times to get there, you have plenty of time to be like, yeah, I don't think I actually really want to do. It's not the act of swiping. It just gives you that stopping point to acknowledge, like, is this actually what I want to do? Do I actually want to be on this? And 9 out of 10, my answer is no. I don't. I'll go do something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that for sure.
So, as we wind up here, and this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely.
Um, if could you share with the listeners the best ways to learn more about you and engage with you and engage with your services?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Which, yeah, this I can't believe our time is gone. It's been such a great conversation, and I like it because it's from an angle that I don't always get to talk about. Right. I really wanted to make sure these things land with your audience, and it's exciting because everything applies to everything. Right. If you can look at it from the right way, and there's so many ways to level up our lives. And so the ways people can get in touch with me, it's drmorganoaks.com. It's OAKS. It's the same handle on Instagram, on Facebook, on LinkedIn. And what I usually share with people, I really love empowering people. Remember a few years ago when, oh my gosh, there was a movie came out about Queen, and I'm forgetting the name of the movie right now.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Bohemian
Yes.
Rhapsody. Yes. So
Yeah.
it's like around December, probably, I don't know, 2016 or whatever, 2017, 2018, when I watched that. And I left the theater, I was just sobbing during that movie, going, gosh, I just want to be able to impact more people. That scene of him at that big stadium concert and how he's impacting all those people. And the intuitive hit that I got was, I can help people through videos, podcast interviews, and even just doing one-on-one calls. So I have a lot of people that reach out through the website, and we schedule just a free 20 or 30-minute conversation. And I'm a big fan of connecting people with resources. A lot of those conversations like, oh, watch this YouTube video, buy this $20 book, let me know in 3 months how you're doing. Right. So if people want to reach out and just have a conversation there, I find if you've tried, let's say 3, 4, 5 traditional ways to get past where you're stuck, we tend to think we've tried everything and we give up. And if you have somebody that's been interested enough in all the different varieties of healing and wellness and thriving, there's probably another resource out there. So
That's great. And you
That's
see
awesome.
people everywhere, right? They don't have to be in Colorado.
yeah, they don't have to be in Colorado. Most of my work, like at this point, chiropractic's the smallest thing I'm doing, really much more focused on motivational speaking, high performance coaching. I do a bunch of sessions over Zoom every week and just try to be, a resource to people living the best life that they can.
That's great.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. And thank you for joining us today on the Healthier Tech podcast. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thank you both for having me
Thank you.
on. And thank you for providing this great platform to help support people in a way that's is probably the number one thing people need supported with right now. So thanks for hosting the show.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in the show. Please like and subscribe to the Healthier Tech Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Get your free quick start guide to building a healthier relationship with technology and our latest information at healthiertech.co.